everyone, welcome to CEC lecture. The topic that we will be taking forward for analysis is understanding India-Africa relations. I am Dr. Amna, your educator. I teach political science at Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College for Women, University of Delhi. Dear learners, in the CEC lecture on the very important topic understanding India-Africa relations, we shall try to cover a vast trajectory, namely in terms of situating the contours of India-Africa relations right from ancient times to understanding as to how in the present times India-Africa relations are being re-engineered and being taken towards new heights. Whenever we try to understand India's relationship with any country, any nation, it is very essential to understand that India has had a great civilization history. Now, this is also very significant fact while understanding India-Africa relations, that one of the reasons for strong foundation of India-Africa relations comes from the fact that both India and Africa share civilizational heritage, and the idea of bond of a common civilization heritage ties go back to the ancient times. When we hear about the ideas and the work of Marco Polo, when we hear about the trade ties between India and African coastal region, this definitely shows us that India-Africa ties can be at the very outset said to be traced right from the ancient time. Now, with time, these ties have progressed also. When we look at the phases of history in the era of 1960s, India and African solidarity was definitely seen during the Cold War, when India and several African nations got together to support the idea of non-alignment movement, wherein amidst the power crisis wherein the world was witnessing the ideological paradigm of Cold War, the world was divided into two power blocks, namely the capitalist bloc versus the communist bloc. And in this scenario, several African countries like India wanted to safeguard their newly attained independence. Many African countries like India have also witnessed the imperialism and colonialism, and sharing from such common experiences, Afro-Asian countries got together to put forward an independent voice in terms of neutrality, in terms of much positive engagement of world affairs by not aligning with any power bloc. Then with time, one did find that how India was one of the supporters of anti-racial discrimination that was going on. India supported all kinds of efforts to end apartheid, and this shows that how Afro-Asian solidarity with respect to India definitely got a new meaning, because India opposed all kinds of discrimination that was going on. Then when the idea of Afro-Asian solidarity, we find that with the end of the Cold War and with the rise of a new world wherein globalization dominated the paradigm, therein there was reimagining. There were attempts to re-identify contours of links of engagement together with each other in a much more meaningful manner. Now, Africa, when we look at some very important facts, it is one of the largest continents on the globe. It is home to nearly huge amount of percentage of world population. 55 countries are there, and all these statistics definitely have been duly accommodated in diplomatic maneuvers by India to have a much meaningful engagement with Africa. We have seen that how ties with Africa have been re-engaged. When we look at from the geostrategical perspective, the idea of Horn of Trade region as to how Indian Ocean was connected towards Suez Canal, India has always taken this as a very important aspect of India-Africa relations. When we look at some contemporary, very interesting perspective and events, we saw that how many African countries' defense ministers came together for the Defense Expo Mela that was held in 2020. And this also shows that how today countries are ready to talk on very significant issues of the world in a very determined language. Then we see that how today ties with African countries are definitely drawing many other similarities. We see that how agriculture is one of the region wherein India and Africa share commonality. The idea of food security is one area another there wherein India and Africa are working at several realms to ensure diplomatic apparatus going forward in a very meaningful manner. We see that how India-Africa Forum Summit, with these talks, they have been witnessing greater participation, much more better in cooperation of issues, expansion of areas of cooperation in order to strengthen the ties between the two great civilizations. We see that how today India is engaging with Africa on several issues. One of that is global governance. When we talk about reform of United Nations, when we look at the issue of trading agreements in World Trade Organization, or when we look at issues of diaspora, issues like IPSA, BRICS, these are certain other areas wherein we are finding that how several African countries are striking a common chord of engagement, of cooperation, of supporting India's endeavors. So therefore we see that how even at United Nations, when we talk about reform of the Security Council, many African nations support India's stand for a permanent seat in the Security Council. When we talk about several other United Nations outreach, namely United Nations peacekeeping operations, India has been at the forefront to pledge support for African nation. Then when we look at energy today, no doubt both the civilizations, India and Africa, they have great amount of natural resources, and then all countries are also looking forward for tapping low carbon alternatives. Herein also we are finding certain very important steps being taken by the two countries, that is namely India and the African countries, to get together to work out new horizons of energy security. And also not to forget that for International Solar Alliance, Africa's cooperations, Africa's support is of huge support for this great initiative by India to explore new options for energy safety and security for global affairs. So therefore we see that how India-Africa relations are being reimagined and re-engineered, not only from the security perspective but also trying to tap together various avenues of non-traditional security. We all know that today in the global world, nations have to look forward for multiple channels of interaction and as well as multiple issues which lead to rise of interdependencies and interconnectedness. India-Africa ties too have witnessed the same amount of synergies, have witnessed the same amount of coordination of efforts. To make a very important point here, taking cue from the very significant address by the Indian Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji to the Uganda Parliament Kampala in 2018, wherein several issues like agriculture, climate change, maritime security, reform of global governance are areas wherein the two entities at hand can strike together for a common cause. Now, when we talk about maritime security, we all know how ocean reserves are very important for both African countries as well as India. And the idea of blue economy is significant to usher in various other initiatives. Now, this is one area, especially in the Indian Ocean region, right from management of better maritime security, naval initiatives, to ensuring as to how this very significant geopolitical resource can be factored in to ensure cooperation has been duly pondered over and acted upon both by India as well as several initiatives by many countries of Africa. Then alongside maritime security, when we see that how climate change, global warming, loss of biodiversity, they are very significant initiatives, and we find that how today India has a striking similarity of agreement on the issue that why should the other countries suffer because of lopsided development paradigm which affects the environment. So therefore, this is another area where one is witnessing increase in cooperation and participation. So we see that how today India-Africa ties are being seen on a wide campus, wide canvas, namely that how from supplying naval vessels to Mozambique to ensuring vocational training for Zambia, Gambia and Rwanda, to ensuring that how India has always pledged aid and support for issues of independence and struggle for several African countries like Tanzania, Nigeria, amongst others. Today, India-Africa partnership is on a much larger scale. Now, amidst this, it is very essential also to understand that today this partnership is being diversified into several new areas, namely education, human resources. Today, how India pledges support for African students to come forward and be here in India, and similarly support several educational engineering mechanisms in various countries of Africa. Then similarly, when we try to understand that how in the realm of pharmaceuticals also, one witnessed the first Afro-Asian Health Science Meet. So therefore, there are new avenues that are being tapped as and when global governance is presenting various issues and aspects. Now, when we try to understand ties between any two countries and continents, it's very essential to see the challenges. Whenever we talk about India-Africa relations, Afro-Asian solidarity is very significant to be pondered over, because at the same time, today India-Africa ties are being debated with the issue of increase in Chinese engagement in Africa. However, there are critiques, there are theorists who point out that today Chinese engagement in Africa is more about geopolitics. It's more about a new form of imperialism, as many are coding, or for that matter, it is not on equal terms. Whereas India-Africa partnership and engagement is that of equal partners, is that of mutual consensus on absolute gains together. Similarly, when we are talking about Afro-Asian solidarity with China's several initiatives to get Africa together on several of its initiatives, one also must recall that how in 2016 the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe put forward a new vision wherein India and Japan with African countries will work together to work out new Afro-Asian agreement on cooperation. So therefore, with the entire doubt over aid extended by China, with the issue of conditionalities that comes and other forms of exploitation of labor news that was there with Chinese help, today countries are looking at India to carve out new avenues of Afro-Asian solidarity. Then it's also very essential to see that how, with India Africa Forum Summit and India Development Fund, wherein India has pledged millions of financial resources to help African nations. As to what are the reasons that India-Africa ties over the times are getting magnified, increased, and attempts are being made to ensure sustainability. And primarily, there are three very important factors to be seen here. Firstly, common civilizational heritage. This always gives a strong foundation to nurture relationships for any countries in the bilateral, multilateral avenues on a much more meaningful term. Then comes the idea that is similar development challenges, right from issue of balancing demographics to issue of diversity of natural resources to issue of factoring demands of people with respect to supply, namely in terms of economy, livelihood, hunt for new sources. Today, India and Africa are sharing similar development challenges, and these challenges, right from unemployment to climate change to global warming to ensuring agrarian food security to ensuring right balance between agriculture and industry, maritime security, pharmaceutical development, education, development of human resources, vocational training, all of it are linked. Then comes the last aspect, that is common consensual vision. Both India and Africa, they affirm their faith in the United Nations system. They talk about the need to reform global governance. They talk about parity in the trading system. They point towards the issue of how aid sometimes comes with a cost, and this cost is often borne by the people. So therefore, these are very important aspects that one has to ponder over while understanding India-Africa ties. Then one also has to have a holistic understanding by looking at the challenges that are there for India-Africa ties. First, of course, whenever we understand the idea of Afro-Asian solidarity, keeping the Indian view, one has to take into account that is of the China factor. Today, there are concerns and deliberations amidst and among several African countries of the issue as to how Chinese aid is bound by conditionalities, and the China factor is also has to be taken into consideration by India while working out its diplomatic maneuvers towards Africa. Then second comes is that of political instability and other geopolitical tensions that are there within African countries. Because stability in the political apparatus, stability of the community and the group is often a great thing for diplomatic avenues to go forward. But however, with changes of regime, with tensions, internal crisis, these often present a stoppage for diplomatic avenues to go forward, and these tensions have to be factored in by India while it extends its multiple arrays and avenues of cooperation with several African countries. And then comes the issue of terrorism, because any initiative has to go forward, taking forward the issue of national interest, national stability, national integrity. Amidst all this big paradigm, one finds that today Indian-African ties have come a long way, right from having common civilizational links, trade ties, export and import via seaways, water links. Today ties are being re-engineered and reimagined on lines of hard power as well as on lines of soft power. Today, as the world is revisiting the issues of global governance, reforming contours of world politics, the eyes are definitely on India to take an important role. And solidarity, right kind of engagement and strengthening of initiatives with several African countries will definitely give a much needed strength to Indian diplomatic avenues. So therefore we see that how today ties of India and Africa have been re-engineered, reimagined, and for successful diplomatic foundations and endeavors in future, the need of the hour here is to consolidate gains of the past, to move forward with the challenges of the future with present efforts based on transparency and trust. So dear learners, dear listeners, this was the lecture on India-Africa ties. We hope you all enjoyed learning from this lecture. Thank you very much for being with us.